A lone pelican refusing to migrate uncovered a hidden injustice no one was meant to see. A powerful research group had embedded a device inside its beak, part of a secret experiment to override nature itself. But Dr. Melissa Hartman didn't look away, and what she found turned one bird into a whistleblower. Just wait until you see how this shocking story unfolds, and why, in the end, justice finally took flight. It was late November when rangers at the Eber Wildlife Reserve, a quiet but critical wetland near the Great Salt Lake, noticed something that didn't add up. Migration season had come and gone. Thousands of pelicans had taken to the sky in their grand, V-shaped flocks, heading south to warmer waters as they had for centuries. But one remained, a single great white pelican, standing motionless near the frozen shallows of the lake, its white feathers ghostly against the darkening winter landscape. It didn't forage, it didn't fly, it barely moved, except to occasionally glance toward the sky, as if waiting for something no one else could see. At first the rangers assumed it was injured, a broken wing perhaps, or maybe sickness, but closer observation only deepened the mystery. The bird, a mature adult male, large and proud-looking, appeared physically intact. It was alert, yet refused food. It avoided the fish dropped for it. Dr. Melissa Hartman, an ornithologist from Colorado State University with over 15 years of field experience, was called in to evaluate the situation. She had spent much of her career studying disrupted migration patterns caused by shifting climates and habitat loss. But nothing in her research had prepared her for this. "Migration isn't a choice," she explained calmly to the local press a week later. "It's hardwired behavior. When a pelican stays behind, that means something in its internal compass is broken, or someone broke it." Melissa observed the bird for nearly 4 days. She and her assistant, a graduate student named Logan Myers, camped near the shoreline with scopes and cameras. They documented every movement, every hesitation. The bird had no tags, no visible wounds, but its behavior was consistently abnormal. It would sometimes raise its massive beak toward the sky and release a sound, not a cry, not a call, but something in between. "It sounded like a wheeze," Melissa would later say, but too deliberate, almost like it was trying to say something. They named him Captain, partly out of affection, partly because he seemed like a soldier left behind after the war was over. After several failed attempts to feed or encourage flight, the decision was made. The bird needed a full veterinary examination. Melissa approved the use of a mild tranquilizer. She was expecting to find an internal injury, maybe a tumor pressing on the brain, possibly something neurological. What they found was nothing like that. As Dr. Evan Brody, the wildlife vet on call, gently opened the pelican's beak to check for throat obstructions, his hand suddenly froze. There was metal inside, not swallowed, embedded, twisted through the tissue of the lower mandible like an unnatural thread. The room went silent. And that was only the beginning. Dr. Evan Brody had examined hundreds of wild birds in his career, victims of environmental neglect, accidental injuries, or human-made hazards. But nothing in his 2 decades of fieldwork prepared him for what he saw when he began examining Captain. At first glance, the lower beak seemed oddly misshapen, subtle but wrong. The outer ridge had a faint bulge, the kind you might expect from an embedded object, but not at this scale. When the feathers were gently parted and the tissue pulled back, a strange metallic glint caught the light. Not plastic, not fishing wire. Thin filaments of metal were woven into the pelican's beak lining, not attached externally, but threaded through the soft cartilage beneath. It looked intentional, too uniform to be natural, too complex to be accidental. Initially, I assumed it was some kind of trap remnant. Snare wire, maybe, Brody later explained in a formal report. But once we began cleaning the tissue, we realized what we were looking at. What emerged was small, corroded, and unmistakably artificial, a USB flash drive. It had been embedded so deeply that necrotic tissue had formed around it. The bird's body had tried to reject it, or possibly adapt to it. encasing it like a foreign object. It wasn't a swallowed item. It was fused into the biology. Brody stared at it. Melissa, silent beside him, took one cautious step forward and leaned in. The room fell quiet. "Birds don't carry USBs," Brody said, barely above a whisper. "This wasn't an accident. Someone put this there." The object was carefully removed, placed into an evidence bag, and handed to Logan Myers, Melissa's grad student. He took it to a secure workstation in the reserve's lab, where it was dried and connected to an offline machine. What they found inside stopped everyone cold. At first, just folders, encrypted but labeled. Some in uppercase, others in cold clinical naming conventions. Property underscore of underscore CRN vector underscore nodes. Test flight underscore Gen 6. Then came the time-stamped video files, no metadata on location, just one file name that stood out like a warning. Do underscore not underscore release underscore aber underscore fault line underscore test footage dot move. Melissa felt her pulse spike. Her hand hovered over the mouse. She double-clicked. The screen flickered, then went black. A low hum came through the speakers. The file began to play. Though the content itself would be discussed only in sealed rooms later, those who saw the footage in that moment would never forget it. The Pelican hadn't stayed behind because it was weak, injured, or disoriented. It hadn't resisted migration. It had been sent back. The file was grainy and poorly stabilized, likely recorded from a head-mounted device. The first few frames showed little bug, just gray walls, flickering overhead lights, and the constant hum of machinery. Then the camera turned. What it captured next stunned everyone in the room. A large, enclosed space, geometrically perfect, windowless. Holographic projectors lined the ceiling, simulating a cloudless sky, but the birds, dozens of great white pelicans, were clearly agitated. They flew in tight, repetitive patterns, circling under the illusion of open air. Only there were no thermals, no natural wind, and no way out. Some of the birds bumped into the chamber walls, invisible barriers that triggered disorienting flashes. Others let out sharp, distressed cries, veering off course and crashing into one another. They weren't flying because they wanted to. They were being pushed, tested. Then came the voice. Low, distorted by radio static and pitch filters. Flight instinct suppressed. Subject override confirmed. Phase 3 viable. The footage cut to black for 3 seconds. When it returned, one pelican dropped midair. No visible cause, it simply stopped flying. Melissa stood frozen as the video ended. Her thoughts spiraled. This wasn't about technology. It wasn't about migration. It was about control. They weren't observing instincts. They were dismantling them. Guilt hit her like the wave. She had gone in thinking she was helping a lost animal. Instead, she had uncovered something larger, something that wasn't supposed to be seen. She sent preliminary findings to a quiet contact at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. No reply. She reached out to a federal liaison who had funded her prior research. Days passed. Then came the notice. Her university lab was being shut down, temporarily audited by an entity listed only as Federal Bioecological Oversight Division. The message was clear. Return all recovered materials. No copies, no further communication. But Melissa had anticipated this. Before anything was turned over, she made a complete encrypted backup of the footage and the Pelican's medical records. She stored it across multiple drives and devices, both physical and digital, and then she waited. 3 weeks later, under a pseudonym, she uploaded everything, anonymously, to a cloud server used by independent researchers and whistleblowers. It was only meant to be shared with a few trusted colleagues. Within 48 hours, it had over 2 million views. By the end of the week, that number had risen to 10. The reaction was immediate. Protests erupted outside CRN's Denver research campus. Independent journalists began piecing together paper trails linking CRN to a Department of Advanced Systems initiative long rumored to be developing behavioral override technologies in wildlife. Bioethics watchdogs demanded transparency. Environmental law firms filed injunctions. Congressional hearings were quietly scheduled. And the bird who started it all, Captain, was moved to a protected sanctuary in northern Oregon. Still unable to fly, but no longer alone. No trackers, no tags, no wires in his beak. Just open sky. The final scene of the viral video, now watched by over 22 million people, is simple. Captain, standing at the edge of a sanctuary pond, blinking slowly, wings half extended in the sunlight. A voiceover plays. It's Melissa, calm, measured, but resolute. Instinct is not programmable. Nature cannot be overwritten. And sometimes, when the world isn't ready, the truth finds a way to fly back in a beak full of evidence. Then it cuts to black. No credits, no music, just silence.